These days, in 2025, when a woman claims she's been sexually assaulted, she rightly gets all the sympathy that situation warrants. But if that woman's reputation as a tough and edgy adult performer clouds the accusation, the investigation can become more difficult and can stall. Then, rightly or wrongly, that woman feels that with things taking too long, that justice is not siding with her. And so she decides to take matters into her own hands. We're going to 2021 and to a case that travels from Virginia to Ohio. This is the convoluted case of the death of Matthew Dunmeyer, and this is Murder of Crows. Chelsea Perkins seemed to have lived several different lives in a relatively short time. In her younger years, she always looked very polished and put together, at least on the outside. Later on in life, she oozed edginess, but one thing always remained: a rage and chaos bubbling away just below the surface. In her 20s, she became known online under the name Sabrina Savage, an OnlyFans model who built her brand on being outspoken, edgy, and absolutely unapologetic. Her posts screamed confidence with motorcycles, guns, bold tattoos, and a persona that oozed sex appeal and power. And to her followers, she looked untouchable, a woman making her own rules. The kind of alpha female that was magnetic in her confidence. But behind that carefully crafted image was someone carrying a lifetime of heavy baggage. Chelsea's history was full of deep-rooted trauma. She had claimed that years earlier, a young man from her past named Matthew Dunmeyer had raped her. And that allegation would become the spark that set everything in motion that would happen later. On the internet, she wore a mask of glamour. But offline, she was a woman who felt consumed by rage. Her life hadn't always been aimed at adult content creation or searching infamy. After high school in Virginia back in 2009, Chelsea actually enlisted in the United States Coast Guard, and she served for 3 years as a small boat crew member in Houston, Texas. And during that time, she even married another service member. The couple had 2 children and settled down in Northern Virginia. And for a while, it looked like she was living a fairly normal military family life. She had steady work, marriage, kids, and a future that looked, at least on the surface, stable. But for some reason, Chelsea was never able to settle. She was restless, and the veneer of normality hid a wanderlust and a desire to keep reaching for something that she did not have. And she really didn't even know what that something was. Stability never stuck with Chelsea. After leaving the military in 2012, she reinvented herself in a way that shocked people that had known her before. She stepped into the adult entertainment world and eventually into the booming OnlyFans industry under her chosen stage name, Sabrina Savage. For Chelsea, this wasn't just a job, it was a complete overhaul of her identity, a way of controlling how she was seen, and perhaps even how she saw herself. Her online platforms showcased this new version of Chelsea, tattooed, daring, fully in charge of her sexuality, and able to turn attention into income. She leaned into the savage persona, throwing up the middle finger and showing off guns in her photos. And for a while it seemed to be working. She had fans, subscribers, and money flowing in. This change had combined her desire for a new, confident public face with a source of income to reinforce the changes. But despite the brash and brazen new persona, there were no police records trailing her, no violent arrests, no red flags in her criminal history, nothing to suggest fatal violence in her future. So Chelsea had successfully built something of a double life, one full of curated confidence for the camera, and another where the ghosts of her trauma were constantly eating at her. And it wouldn't be long before that darker side took centre stage. From uniform to lingerie, from serving on a boat crew to building an online empire that thrived on seduction and shock value. On one hand, Chelsea had once represented duty, structure, and neatness and tidiness. But on the other hand, she had become Sabrina Savage, a woman who revelled in the attention that came with bearing it all online. Which one was the real Chelsea is open to discussion, and maybe it was actually an amalgam of both sides of this particular coin. And reinventions like this don't come from nowhere. They often mean someone is running away from something, or running towards an entirely different version of themselves. And for Chelsea, this transformation wasn't just about money or freedom, it was about power. That power, though, wouldn't last. Because while Chelsea was reinventing her public image, her private rage was boiling and boiling and boiling. Chelsea said that her rage had a name, that being Matthew Dunmeyer. She accused him of raping her, and from that point on, nothing else in her life seemed bigger than that claim. Now, the two weren't strangers. Their history went all the way back to high school in Virginia, between 2005 and 2009. They weren't close friends, but they ran in similar circles, saw the same faces at the same parties, and shared the same small town backdrop. After graduation, though, they went in opposite directions. Matthew chased a music career in Ohio, while Chelsea, as we know, signed up for the Coast Guard, and then later built her adult and entertainment alter ego. And for years their lives barely overlapped. That was until 2017, and that's when Chelsea said everything changed, and that he sexually assaulted her. It wasn't just another bad chapter in her chaotic life. She claimed it was the event that scarred her beyond repair. And in March of 2017, she formally accused Matthew of rape. According to Coast Guard reports, Chelsea filed her report on March the 22nd, alleging that Matthew had sexually assaulted her just days earlier, on March the 16th. Her complaint was serious enough that it triggered not only a Coast Guard inquiry, but also a full police investigation. By March of 24th, Virginia Beach Police had their own report on file. And for a time, it seemed like justice might actually be in motion. But then came the gut punch that so many survivors know all too well. After digging into the case, investigators decided they didn't have the evidence to move forward. No charges were filed, no trial, no accountability. For Chelsea, it was like screaming into the void. Her anger and frustration were completely understandable, but sexual assault cases are notoriously difficult to prove and prosecute. It's not about truth or lies. It's about what can be proved beyond a reasonable doubt. Like too many survivors, Chelsea felt ignored when she spoke up. Law enforcement didn't give her the justice that she was so desperate for. No arrest, no validation of what had happened to her. She was left feeling like her pain was just another case file shoved into a drawer, and it was eating her alive. And sadly, this is not all that uncommon. As I said, these sexual assault cases are difficult to prosecute unless there is solid evidence. And it's the reason that most victims of rape never bother to file charges against their perpetrator. But Chelsea did try. And unfortunately, her case was mostly ignored, or that's how it felt to her, setting the scene for what was to come next. The path to Matthew Dunmoy's death started in March of 2021. After years of silence, a Facebook notification popped up. Matthew had sent Chelsea a friend request. She had likely popped up in the section of people you may know. More like people from your past that you may want to forget, in truth. But Chelsea was intrigued. And just like that, a link to the past was reopened. Maybe it was this momentary lapse of judgment that perhaps opened the path to personal retribution, but ultimately legal persecution. Why he reached out is anyone's guess. Maybe he was feeling nostalgic. Maybe he wanted to find out what had become of his old high school acquaintance. Whatever the reason, Chelsea didn't ignore it. She responded, and soon the two were messaging, trading updates like old classmates do. And on the surface, it looked harmless enough. Chelsea mentioned that she'd soon be heading through Ohio, where Matthew was living. She said she had a tattoo appointment booked in Michigan, and since she'd be relatively nearby, why not meet up and reminisce about the old days? Just a casual pit stop, a coffee and catch-up session between two people who hadn't seen each other for years. To Matthew, it sounded simple, it sounded innocent. He wasn't suspicious. There was nothing within the chats to suggest there was any danger. As far as he knew, it was just a friendly meet-up with someone from the past. But behind Chelsea's suggestion, there was something sinister born out of years of suffering, a grotesque perceived injustice. Before we move on to what happened next, we need to pause and take a little bit of time to talk about who Matthew was. Before his name became entangled with Chelsea Perkins, Matthew Dunmoy was a 31-year-old free spirit, always with a guitar in his hands and music in his blood. Born on November the 26th, 1989 in Virginia, he had a small-town warmth that made people feel at ease just being around him. His uncle would later remember him as an aspiring musician who had packed up for Cleveland. Matthew's life in Ohio was simple but full. He worked hard, showed up when people needed him, and poured whatever extra time he had into music and friendship. Co-workers described him as steady, reliable, the kind of guy who wouldn't just clock in, but would also check in, making sure that everyone else was okay. Friends knew him as loyal to a fault, always ready to lend an amp, a couch, or just a listening ear. He was also dad to two small children who looked up to him, and it was a role he took seriously even when personal relationships got messy. The bond he had with his children grounded him in ways that the music alone just couldn't. Matthew's world revolved around the little things that bring people joy. Strumming guitar riffs late into the night, hanging out with friends in Cleveland's tight-knit music scene, or just soaking up the kind of camaraderie that makes life feel just that little bit less heavy. He was a simple man with simple pleasures, and he had no idea that reconnecting with an old high school acquaintance would cost him everything. On March the 3rd, 2021, a Facebook notification set everything in motion. Now, there are conflicting reports about the friend request and who sent it, but the court documents actually say that Matthew sent Chelsea a friend request, and she accepted. What he didn't know was that later that same day, she posted something to her timeline that should have sent chills down anyone's spine. Dead men tell no tales. Perhaps a warning dressed up like some kind of cryptic status update. And Matthew didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he didn't connect the dots. Because when Chelsea slid into his messages, he answered. Their chats seemed innocuous and completely harmless. Chelsea mentioned that she'd be driving through Cleveland on her way to her tattoo appointment in Michigan, and since she'd be passing through, why not meet up? Their own little high school reunion. And to Matthew, understandably, it was no big deal, just catching up with someone from the past. He had no idea that he was stepping into a trap. By Friday, March the 5th, Matthew was exactly where his friends expected him to be, at his favourite pub, winding down the week with drinks and conversation. Around 6 p.m, his phone buzzed with a message. He looked up from the screen, grinned, and told his buddies, "A girl I know online is here." He was upbeat, unsuspecting, and completely relaxed. When he walked out of the pub, a colleague followed him just to say goodbye as they parted ways. In the parking lot, they spotted a white smart car idling under the glow of the rear lights. Behind the wheel was a brown-haired woman, and Matthew smiled, waved, and climbed into the passenger seat. And the car pulled away, heading north. What Matthew didn't know was that Chelsea had driven over 300 miles from Virginia for this exact moment. After picking him up, their movements were tracked all over the city. Surveillance footage from a nearby BP station caught Matthew walking inside to grab cigarettes, a red canned drink, and a bottle of water. On the surface, a mundane purchase, but it would later tie Chelsea to the night's events in ways that she probably never imagined. The next stop was an Airbnb in Cleveland. Chelsea had booked it under her real name, credit card and all, so there was no effort to try to cover her tracks. Security footage also showed the pair at a potbelly sandwich shop later that evening, before returning to the rental property. But by the next morning, things were already going south. Matthew sent a text to his girlfriend saying that he planned to donate plasma and then he'd be returning home. The exchanges between the two that day suggested that his girlfriend wasn't exactly thrilled with the idea of her boyfriend spending time at an Airbnb with some mystery woman, and who can blame her, really? It's all very vague and suspicious. Around 9 a.m. on March the 6th, Matthew texted his girlfriend, "I'm guessing you don't miss me, and I bet you're mad with me. I pissed this chick off anyway, so I hope you're happy." With that message hinting that Chelsea was growing irritated. But Matthew still didn't seem to sense any real danger. He thought he'd be heading home soon, with nothing more than an awkward night with an old acquaintance behind him. At 9:45 a.m., his phone pulled up Google Maps for directions to Terra Vista Natural Study Area inside Cuyahoga Valley National Park. Quiet stretch of woods and hiking trails, very isolated and easy to get lost in. GPS data later placed both phones, that's his and Chelsea's, in that area by 9:59. Court records say the two hiked together, eventually wandering off-trail and deeper into the forest. At 10:29, Matthew sent one last text to his girlfriend, "Okay, I'll see you in a little while." But the silence of Cuyahoga Valley National Park was broken that Saturday morning, when between 11:30 and 11:50, a couple out hiking reported hearing a single gunshot echo through the trees. They didn't know it then, but that sound was Matthew's final moment alive. Not long after, another pair of hikers crossed paths with a strange woman wandering the woods. She was dressed head to toe in black, knee-high boots, a hoodie pulled tight, and she seemed disoriented but strangely emotionless, muttering something about being lost and looking for a cemetery. Now this was Chelsea hiding in plain sight. Little did those hikers know that Matthew's body was almost close enough to touch, just hidden away in the brush. But Matthew's body wouldn't be found right away. It took 3 more days before another set of hikers stumbled upon his remains deep in the park. He was face down, a single gunshot wound to the back of his head, execution style. The Aquafina water bottle he'd bought at the gas station the night before lay beside him, with his DNA on it, but Chelsea's too. And because the murder happened on the federal land of a national park, the case immediately escalated. The FBI's Cleveland Division, Valley View Police, National Park Police, and the U.S. Attorney's Office all piled into the incident. This wasn't just a missing persons case anymore. This was a federal murder investigation. A big fuck-off, fanfare circus, etc. Agents traced Matthew's last days, starting with what he told his co-workers. And they said he was meeting a girl he knew online. His supervisor remembered seeing him leave the bar, grinning as he hopped into a white smart car driven by a brown-haired woman. That tiny detail was the first solid lead. But from there, the case unfolded like clockwork. Ohio's web of surveillance cameras and license plate readers revealed the smart car belonged to Chelsea's husband, a Coast Guard member back in Virginia. The Airbnb reservation, booked in Chelsea's name with her own credit card. The digital breadcrumbs were everywhere. With all of the physical and digital evidence left behind, it does not appear that Chelsea did a whole lot of planning and absolutely no covering of her tracks. Maybe she was too consumed by her rage. A woman on a mission without any thought of what would come after this act. Cell phone records sealed the deal. GPS data showed Chelsea's phone pinging near the park at 9:59 a.m. The same time that Matthew's phone activity suddenly went silent. And while Matthew's phone was never recovered, Chelsea's devices painted a damning picture. On the day of the murder, she removed him from her friends list and deactivated her account. Days later, investigators discovered a deleted note on her phone that read like something of a staged confession. Reading, "I'm sorry I beat you and I raped a couple of chicks years ago. I paid for my sins with blood." It looked like she planned to post it from Matthew's account in an attempt to rewrite the narrative. Had she taken his phone with a plan to rewrite history? That's something that we will probably never know. On March the 30th, 2021, agents raided Chelsea's Virginia home. In a backpack, they found her ID and a Springfield Armory 9mm pistol. Forensic testing confirmed what everyone believed. The bullet pulled from Matthew's skull matched her gun. Ballistics don't lie. After that, the evidence stacked high and fast. Surveillance footage, license plates, Airbnb receipts, DNA under Matthew's fingernails, and even the water bottle at the scene. Investigators spent 9 months meticulously documenting every lead, building a case so airtight that conviction was basically inevitable. Chelsea Perkins thought she could script her own brand of justice, but instead she left a trail so clear that it read like a road map to her own downfall. But just when the investigators thought they were slowly closing the net around Chelsea Perkins, the case took even more of a shocking turn, and it didn't come from her. In November 2021, while federal agents were still methodically building their case, this time it was Matthew's parents deciding justice wasn't moving fast enough. His mother, Tommy Lynn Dunmeyer, and his father, John Nelson McQuillan, drove from Virginia to Washington, D.C. with a single mission: to kill Chelsea themselves. Revenge layering on revenge. Tommy Lynn disguised herself as a UPS driver, walked up to an apartment door and knocked. When a woman answered, she pulled out a gun and shot her twice in the stomach. But the woman wasn't Chelsea. She had nothing to do with the case at all. Just an innocent bystander at the wrong door at the wrong time. Miraculously and thankfully, she survived. After the botched hit, Matthew's parents swapped the plates on their car and fled. Federal agents tracked them to Florida, where a high-speed chase ended in tragedy. As officers closed in, Tommy Lynn turned the gun on herself and took her own life. John Nelson was arrested, later pleading guilty to accessory after the fact to assault with intent to kill. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison. That seems rather lenient. But there was an explosive twist that no one saw coming. Matthew's grieving parents, so consumed by their son's murder and the lack of an arrest, ended up destroying their own lives and nearly ending another innocent life. And all the while, Chelsea was still out there watching as her victims' family became criminals themselves. A perfect example of the ripple effect in action, of how torment can ravage even the most tranquil of minds. And while it took nearly 9 months, on December the 9th, 2021, federal agents finally knocked on Chelsea Perkins' door in Pensacola, Florida. She did not put up a fight and was arrested without incident. The charges were stacked. 2 counts of murder, including first and second degree, plus a firearms charge. And this wasn't some small town court. Because the killing happened on federal land, the stakes were enormous. Chelsea was staring at life in prison without parole, and in the worst case scenario, maybe even the death penalty, and the mountain of evidence against her only made things worse. And then came the tattoo. While Matthew's body lay in the woods, Chelsea didn't bolt for cover or try to erase her tracks. She followed through on the excuse that she'd given him in the first place. Her tattoo appointment. Toll records show her smart car driving north out of Ohio less than 3 hours after the murder, straight toward Michigan. By that afternoon, she was in the chair at a tattoo shop, posting on Instagram as if it was just another road trip adventure. The tattoo she got? A noose etched onto her forearm. Coincidental irreverence at life, or a brag in plain sight? You decide. The case slogged through procedural delays, rescheduled hearings, motions, and back and forth negotiations. Prosecutors knew that they had her cornered, but Chelsea's defense team wasn't rolling over. And their angle was self-defense. They argued that Chelsea feared for her life, pointing back to her 2017 rape allegation against Matthew. She had claimed then, and still claimed, that he assaulted her. Matthew's friends and family said that he was devastated by the accusation, insisting anything between them had been consensual. To prosecutors, this wasn't self-defense, rather it was motive. Chelsea believed she'd been denied justice, so she had set out to claim her own justice. The possibility of the death penalty hung like a shadow over every hearing. At first, it seemed like prosecutors would not pursue the death penalty, but by 2023, with the evidence of premeditation piling higher and higher, capital punishment was then back on the table. So Chelsea now had to weigh her chances in front of a jury against the possibility of never breathing free air again. In March of 2024, prosecutors offered her a lifeline, a plea deal worth 27 to 31 years. She'd be an old woman by the time she walked out, but at least she would walk out. Chelsea rejected it. She clung to her not guilty plea, betting everything on convincing a jury that this was about survival, not revenge. But as the trial date loomed in May of 2025, reality hit. The Airbnb receipts, the ballistics, the toll booth cameras. There was so much proof. Impossible to climb out from under. And just days before jury selection was set to begin, Chelsea finally broke. On May the 27th, 2025, she took the deal and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and to using a firearm during a crime of violence on federal property.
New tonight, a Virginia woman has pleaded guilty to second-degree murder for a shooting that happened in Cuyahoga Valley National Park back in 2021. 35-year-old Chelsea Perkins admitted to shooting 31-year-old Michael Dunmeyer at the Terra Vista Natural Study Area in Valley View. If the judge accepts Perkins' plea agreement, she will face 20 to 25 years in prison.
It was a huge win for prosecutors, sparing them a lengthy trial, while also sparing Chelsea the possibility of life without parole, or even worse. The plea deal guaranteed her between 20 and 25 years in federal prison. Sentencing was set for September the 9th, 2025.
Military veteran and adult performer, now turned convicted killer, just sentenced to 22 and a half years in federal prison for the murder of a local man in the Cuyahoga Valley National Park.
Yeah, she blamed the killing on PTSD from past sex assaults. Investigator Sarah Goldenberg has been covering this case from the very beginning and now has the latest from court.
Chelsea Perkins apologized to the victim's family, saying, quote, "I take full responsibility for what I've done." Meanwhile, the family of Matthew Dunmeyer, who Chelsea shot in the head and left to die alone in the national park, tells me they believe she got off easy.
There's no real way to put value on a human life, the judge said during a 3-hour sentencing hearing at federal court, where no cameras are allowed in the courtroom. Back in May, Chelsea Perkins, now 35 years old, pleaded guilty to a second-degree murder charge and using a gun in the murder of Matthew Dunmeyer. She faced 20 to 25 years in prison, the judge ultimately landing on a sentence in the middle. On Tuesday, family flew in from out of state for the killer and the victim. Perkins smiled at her sister and made a heart sign with her hands during proceedings. Perkins, a mother of young children who also ran an OnlyFans account, admitted to traveling from Virginia to meet the victim, Matthew Dunmeyer, in March 2021 before killing him and trying to cover up her tracks. The two previously knew each other, and she had accused him of rape a few years earlier, but no charges were ever filed. Revenge, her motive, prosecutors said, for Dunmeyer's murder. Investigators found Dunmeyer and Perkins spent the night together at an Airbnb in Cleveland before he was found murdered near a cemetery in Valley View, making this a federal case. According to the FBI and prosecutors, she left an evidence trail behind, including turnpike records of her driving her husband's car, and records showing she got this tattoo, a noose with the words "Tighten Up" in Michigan, the same day she murdered Dunmeyer. Dunmeyer, an aspiring musician and father, was 31 years old. Perkins addressed his family in court, saying she's really sorry for what happened. Matthew's father said, "My son was a good person too, and now his children have no father." Before he read his sentence, Judge Solomon Oliver Jr. said she creates some trauma on herself because of her trauma, and she wasn't living a lifestyle conducive to being a good mother. That's just a fact.
The defense team told me, quote, "We respect the court's decision and the compassion shown to Chelsea." They asked the judge for her to serve time in a federal prison in West Virginia closer to her family, and the judge agreed to the recommendation. With time served, Perkins will be in her early 50s when she gets out. Meanwhile, Matthew Dunmeyer's uncle says his family got a life sentence without him. Sarah Goldenberg, 19 News.
And as part of the deal, she had to admit the uncomfortable truths. That she had travelled across state lines with a loaded gun, that she lured Matthew into the woods, and that she executed him with a shot to the back of the head. For years, investigators had known this was premeditated murder. But with her guilty plea, Chelsea herself finally said the words out loud. Chelsea Perkins wanted revenge on Matthew Dunmeyer. She felt betrayed by the justice system, convinced that her pain had been dismissed, and she decided that she would write her own ending. But her ending wasn't justice, it was an execution. A single bullet in a quiet national park destroyed not only Matthew's life, but her own. And then came the second wave of destruction. Matthew's parents, drowning in grief and furious that Chelsea hadn't yet been arrested. As we know, they tried to take revenge on her. And their badly thought out plan ended with an innocent woman shot, Tommy Lynn Dunmeyer dead by her own hand, and John Nelson McQuillan behind bars. 2 generations swallowed up by violence in the name of retribution. It's hard to find another case where the theme of revenge is so starkly clear. But in the end, what did it buy anyone? Matthew is gone. Chelsea will likely grow old in prison. His mother is dead, and even his father served time. Their children, Matthew's kids and Chelsea's, are left to grow up in the shadow of this carnage. I often say about cases that there are no winners here. But this points out so clearly the trail of devastation that unchecked rage can wreak. Even now, Chelsea has her defenders online. People who look at her case and see a broken system that ignored a survivor, leaving her to fight back the only way that she knew how. To them, she's a symbol of resistance, however messy it turned out. But others see something very, very different. A cautionary tale, if you will. A reminder that unchecked rage doesn't just burn your enemies. It scorches you, too. That taking justice into your own hands can leave more devastation than the original wound did. Her case forces us to look at an uncomfortable truth, how rarely rape cases see a courtroom. Studies show that the majority of sexual assaults in the US are never reported at all, and when they are, only a tiny fraction lead to charges. Survivors know the odds are stacked against them. Fear of not being believed, shame, the trauma of reliving it all in front of strangers, or the brutal fact that prosecutors often pass because they think the case won't stick. For someone like Chelsea filing her 2017 report and then watching it go nowhere may have felt like confirmation of what so many survivors already believe. The system doesn't care. That frustration doesn't excuse what she did, but maybe it helps explain how her anger festered into an obsession. And that's what makes this case so damned complicated. Because while Chelsea ultimately became a killer, her story also highlights how a broken system can push victims towards desperation. When justice feels too far away or impossible, some people look for their own ways to take it back. It seems that there was a measure of mitigation, as even if Matthew didn't assault Chelsea, she believes that he did. That was her truth, and it ate away at her every day that justice was not served. And that was the case of Chelsea Perkins and Matthew Dunmire. As I said earlier, there are no winners here. Just the intertwined tales of revenge gone bad and families reeling from losses that they cannot comprehend but must wrestle with nonetheless. As much as I'd like to dedicate this episode in part to both Chelsea herself and Matthew's parents, by taking the law into their respective hands, they became deadly messengers, irrespective of mitigation. And while we will likely never know if Matthew did assault Chelsea, he still did not deserve the fate he received, so I will dedicate this episode to him. But I will send love to all of those wrapped up in this spiraling and convoluted story of revenge and attempted redemption that just ended badly for everyone. Thank you for watching another episode of Murder of Crows. Please like, share and subscribe and whatnot and yada yada yada. But I'm Steve. This fluffball is Samson. And we will see you when we see you.
Say that you're ready, but you won't like it. You say that you're ready.